Hey,
decade
hey,
or the
hey, Adam, how does Blade Runner
yeah,
2049 stack up to you for this decade?
it was great.
I
I
love
really enjoyed it.
Runner.
It's really
Yeah,
bad.
it's I I'll have to watch it again. I've watched it a few times already. It's one of those movies where like it's very rare that I see something with that scale and budget that I'm able to connect with pretty much throughout. I think that pretty much every element comes together really, really well, and it's one of the rare sequels, or you could even call it kind of a soft reboot. It's one of those very rare ones that isn't a carbon copy, but despite doing its own thing, is still faithful and respectful towards the original. So I really enjoyed it. I loved Denny. So
Apparently,
cinematography was amazing, music was amazing. Yeah.
I
I
thought
enjoy it more than I enjoy the original Blade Runner. Although the original Blade Runner was much more influential as like a piece of cinema history, I enjoyed the new one more as a entertainment sort of narrative experience.
It's funny because
could you why do you like it more than the original? Just curious.
Just from a entertainment experience. Like the
Ah,
original movie is something where if I'm going to watch it, I am basically more appreciating it than I am enjoying it. So it's almost kind of like doing homework in that sense for me. It just doesn't connect to me as much. I feel like it's not that well paced. And the 2049 version I find to be much more entertaining. I'm constantly engaged in it. So yeah, not nearly as influential. Like the new one is not as important as the original Blade Runner, but I enjoy myself more watching it.
I
yeah,
feel
I got you.
exactly the same way.
Yeah, I agree with all that,
Like
except I don't think it was that faithful.
the
It was
yeah, I was
original
gonna
Blade
say
Runner
ER will
iconic.
disagree. I will take the complete reverse position. I
Are you
think the
talking
film's
about
pretty
like
garbage.
the main character being a replicant thing, or something else?
I guess. Well, not really that. More that they bring back Deckard, and they kind of ignore whether or not he's a replicant, even though that would have been, a huge part of the plot.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the original, it wasn't like there's a lot of evidence to support it, so I'm not personally upset that like they didn't take that route when creating the new one. And
Mm.
in terms of his inclusion in the new film, I think that if Sony had not been in charge of the marketing, it would have been much more impactful for the narrative, because Harrison Ford was not supposed to be on the poster. He was not supposed to be in the trailer. It was literally supposed to be revealed at that point in the film, which is why it almost seems like kind of a misleading to put him in the promotional material, because he's not in it very long. He shows up at like the halfway point. And I think that if Sony didn't really fuck up the marketing and just take control um, and present things in a way that Denis Villeneuve didn't want, I think that that would have been much more impactful in the film. And so I don't really, I'm not like bothered by his inclusion of it. I don't know what the, I guess, logical inconsistencies would be with it in terms of the overall universe, because I'm not like a super fan of the original or anything. It's just a movie that I appreciate for its influence on other movies mostly, and its innovation. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed the new one.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it too, but yeah, there are some logical inconsistencies, and I do think, I mean, they would have had him in the advertising anyway. It's just, I think that's inevitable. Blade Runner
Yeah.
With
sequel,
Sony, yeah.
you don't show Harrison Ford. That's kind of nah.
Problem for me is that I'm not invested enough in Blade Runner as a franchise to be able to like run down issues, but I had someone explain to me in excruciating detail everything that's wrong with it after we watched the original and that one. And holy
just
shit, I
read
was
the book, I
shocked at
guess,
how much
which
like how bad the new one is.
I did still really enjoy it as a film. I would say I thought that it was a very like entertaining experience, but as someone who does like who loves the original Blade Runner and who likes the book, I see the problems with it. I think that you can.
I've upset a lot of people by saying that it's not
That's
good
right.
without being able to reference anything, because I've forgotten most of it. Like I said, the the interaction I had took place, I think, 3 years ago now. And like I said, I'm not invested in Blade Runner, so my interest waned, and so does my memory. But I can bring someone on who apparently like is vehemently against the film and can probably try and deliver some explanation for it, especially while Adam is here, because I'm pretty sure he likes it, and it might be interesting.
I like what? Sorry?
You like that movie, Blade Runner 2049? That one?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
Is the Smiling Man coming on?
No. Different man.
Oh my God, it's
Like,
Santa.
I don't know. Like, I'm not.
That's not.
No, it's not. I'm not
really
trying to set up some
depends
kind
on,
of
like,
debate.
what-
I'm trying to give some people some references because I know people are going to be upset if I don't provide something. You don't have to take my
Okay.
perspective seriously because I haven't got you any references for anybody who's concerned about that. Don't worry. But I'm not the guy who can look into it. I'm busy with other stuff, and I just don't care enough about Blade Runner, unfortunately. Also, can this get bigger? There we go.
Hello, everybody.
Explain why Blade Runner's bad.
Well, it doesn't follow the rule set that was given in the original Blade Runner.
Mhm.
And to have its setting, they have to basically erase and gloss over a lot of the stuff that defined Blade Runner's world in the first place. So you have replicants that are operating on planet Earth, which they were banned from in the original. And there's no explanation for what the advantage is for human beings. Because we're assuming that, according to the 2049's disposition, that replicants are seen as subhumans. It's their skin jobs, which is a callback to the original. And it invites the question as to why you would have a replicant being a cop in the first place, and why you would have a replicant who has to have a baseline test to go after other replicants because they might have emotions. But at the beginning of the movie, you have Ryan Gosling, Kay, basically saying that his kind don't run, which is questionable. In addition to that, the business model for Wallace and what he's trying to do doesn't make any sense because he wants to have open-ended replicants that can live forever and that can procreate, which basically means that his intention is to supersede humanity. But his business is based on serving humanity. So if he wants to be a god and in charge of humanity, and like try and advance to evolution, there's not really enough character explanation for why he wants to do that. What's his motivation?
Well, I mean, there's characters that exist in real life that have very strange goals and desires that seem diabolical, that are really not, all that well put together. You could say the same thing for like Thanos too. Like Thanos is not like a very super well what's the word motivated character in terms of how it's justified. So yeah, I mean, like what you're talking about, I can say it's legitimate. It's just not anything that really takes me out of the experience in any way.
Okay, so what are the slave labor children doing on planet Earth if you have replicant labor that is open-ended and can be created? What's the price of a replicant? Is it more expensive to create a replicant than a human being? And so what's the value of those children being on the planet? Is the idea that everybody wants to get off of the planet and go to the outer worlds, like was mentioned in the original Blade Runner?
Well, I don't know where these kids come from. Was that described in the film?
They are...
Where do they get them from? Or are they just like people don't want them and just drop them off? Or like, I don't remember.
Yeah, they're orphans that basically get dropped off. And I'm confused about...
So that's like free then, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, they're basically slave labor, and the guy sells them to people that want to adopt children. And I'm confused as to what the point of that being in the movie is, other than it's a way to mask how Kay was brought up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like there are elements that are brought into the film purely for plot device, but I personally don't see anything like too egregious or like it didn't feel like ham-fisted or stupid to me. Like if we're gonna talk about these sorts of issues, I would say the vast majority of like large scale science fiction films have these same issues to some extent. And that's not saying like, oh yeah, you're supposed to like it, or I'm not trying to convince you that the movie's great, but just that it doesn't really affect my experience that much.
Well, I have more. I mean, how does the replicant love get into the police station without triggering any cameras or like access? There's only one person manning the police station.
Oh yeah, I mean, like there's a couple moments where that had me go like, but like it's part of the reason why I gave it like a 9 instead of a 10. My enjoyment experience was more or less a 10, and there's a couple things here or there that make me go like, really, but they're
Okay.
relatively minor. And I think that in terms of like weighing the film for my own experience, the elements that come together in the movie, like the cinematography, the music, the performances, the like a lot of the effects are like so well done too. And it's really difficult to make effects in a movie at this point that are still able to impress. Like the when they're sort of like sinking the two bodies over top of each other. There's things in concept in this film that, if they were done by any other team, would come off as like ridiculously fake or cheesy or just not convincing. But there's no real moment in this film where I felt like, oh yeah, that's fake. I was able to just like get into it, especially from a visual standpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, the original is the director of photography is Jordan Cronenworth, did an incredible job, and you had Ridley Scott. I'm a huge fan of Sicario. I was just
Oh, I
watching
love
the movie.
Yeah.
Fucking love that movie.
And
Yeah, Sakara is a
That's-
fantastic film.
so that's the same team of director and cinematographer as Blade Runner 2049, and they bring the same game.
Mhm.
However, the writer's different. And if you go back and look at the original Blade Runner, Hampton Fancher wrote the first draft of that script. But Philip K. Dick, Ridley Scott, and the producers didn't like the script enough because it was too pretentious and meandering and didn't have enough. It didn't have enough grit to it. It didn't have enough realism to it, and it didn't have enough
Cowbell.
It didn't have enough cowbell. So they brought in another guy, and that guy ended up writing. He got an Oscar for. It's not Tombstone. I think it's Unforgiven. He wrote.
I like Tombstone.
And when they decided to make 2049, they only had Hampton Fancher and a guy named Michael Green, who I don't know any of his other work. And I think that is probably the primary problem that I have with the movie, is that it has a lot of what you're talking about, kind of thematic and immersive environments that bring you into the movie. But when you actually look at the logic of the movie, it doesn't really make any sense. So one of my biggest examples of the problem with the core of the story is that Kay looks at the previous Nexus, and he's got this little eye thing to detect its serial number. And my question is, if Kay is a Nexus model, then he probably has a serial number because he's a product. So how come Kay can't detect his own serial number? Can
It's
he just look
potential
up
it was
and to the
like
left?
wiped or something. It's potential that it was wiped or something, or scrubbed in some way. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that's a potential.
So if
particularly if he's being used.
if that's possible, then why didn't the other replicant do that? Why didn't he just take his eye out?
I don't know. I'm just saying that it will, but just because K's being used for alternative purposes, it could be that it's been scrubbed like you would scrub the serial number off a gun. You know?
Mm-hmm. When it comes to science fiction movies, for myself, I am less bothered by open-ended questions that aren't explained, and more bothered by very specific rules that the film sets up that it then contradicts. But I mean, like, there's also a possibility of those existing in the film that just I didn't really pick up. But I'm more likely to call out something like Looper, where they say this is how it works, and then they just do something different. Versus, it seems like a few of the issues in Blade Runner 2049 are more or less why did this happen? How did this happen? But not necessarily. I haven't put much thought into the ins and outs of these, but if there's any potential possibilities of explaining it, I'm not sure. Like, the movie was already like 2.5 hours long, so to explain every detail of every situation might not work well for a story or pacing perspective.
Who maybe agree that a lot of the problems with the modern Blade Runner is more that it doesn't align with Dream of Electric Sheep and the original version more than it is so within its own internal consistency. I think there are problems with internal consistency in 2049, but I think that more of the problems arise when you compare it to the source material.
I really, part of the reason I loved it so much is that it did kind of do its own thing at the same time, because I'm really kind of sick of seeing, you know, soft reboots or remakes or sequels, especially that of 80s properties that are more or less just carbon copy safe, you know, let's hit the exact same thing beat by beat, Force Awakens style, right?
I agree with that, but I think that I would like to stay away from a dichotomy of The Last Jedi versus The Force Awakens, where I don't want to have, we do it in one direction and it's super nostalgic and reflective, but it's ultimately hollow, versus doing our own thing, but it negates the consistency of the story. So, like, one of the
I think that there was a healthy mix, though. I don't think it was like in one direction or the other. I think that it was still, you know, faithful to a degree, and you might disagree with that, while still being its own product and exploring its own story and presentation.
I mean,
I thought that it was pretty level in that sense.
So, you've seen Blade Runner. What version would you consider to be the not the official version, but the one that would define canon, or whatever you would call it?
I mean, I was told that it was the final cut, so I watched that. So,
right.
But I haven't seen all the cuts for sure. I'd be interested in seeing the terrible narration one because it sounds funny to me. But
it's hilarious. It's just terrible. But that's apparently the one that Blade Runner 2049 is the sequel to, because the circumstances of the final cut don't play into the premise of Blade Runner 2049. The idea that Rachel can get pregnant creates a new paradigm for what the series is talking about. So instead of her just being a test of a new version of replicant that doesn't know what it is, she's now the first replicant that has a womb that functions. And that's what Wallace is trying to follow up with. And then that also plays into the idea of, is Deckard a replicant or not? Because if he's a replicant, that means that there are two replicants that can have children now, which I think is what 2049 is trying to imply, because they spring in the third act that resistance storyline that seems like it's taken from Children of Men. So that to me is a huge change if you consider the final cut of the movie to be a definitive cut. And then the original cut, I think, is the weak one where it says that they go and live happily ever after. And even that changes because it has to be a retcon. It has to take place 30 years later. Deckard has to be just like Indiana Jones, where he doesn't know he has a kid. And we have to go through this process to get to the nostalgic center of the movie, which is Deckard. And I think that a lot of these choices have made the movie subpar compared to the original one, where I feel like I got a lot of philosophical and emotional satisfaction out of the arcs of the characters. Whereas in 2049, I felt like I was watching the ending of Drive again.
What would you rate the film based on its presentation while completely ignoring how cohesive it is to the original source material?
I would definitely, like, you're just talking about cinematography, talking about miniature effects.
It like to ignore whether or not the story is consistent with the original material. Like, surely there are things to appreciate outside of that about the film, though, right? Because that's the majority of the reason for me loving it.
I love the colors,
film, like the experience of the film for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Amazing set design, like the technical elements of the film all mesh together really well for me.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to come out here and say that Deakins is not one of the best cinematographers of all time, then I would be fooling myself. If I didn't think that Denny knew how to get the subtleties of performances out of his actors, then, you know, I'd be remiss. So, like, maybe I'm too cynical a person. I think I'd give that an 8 out of 10. And the 2 points that I extract are for missing Vangelis's qualities. I think that his soundtrack and the way that it immersed people into the movie, and even immersed the actors, because Ridley Scott used to play the soundtrack snippets. The
Yeah, I heard
Yeah,
about
no.
that. I watched a lot of the special features for.
Yeah, there's a great 3-hour documentary called Dangerous
I
Days
saw
about
that.
the production of it. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and Razor Fist does an hour-long kind of condensed version of that, but it's like his favorite movie. But I take away from the soundtrack because I think that the soundtrack ended up being a little hollow. I think thematically and with what they were trying to do with Kay as an artificial human that's trying to become human worked. I think that some of what Villeneuve, what Denny does with Villeneuve, sorry,
Like VB dead cow, and then Nuv like
Deliberately
Like
pronounce it
Nine
wrong in different ways every time you say the name.
NUHVE.
Dennis.
He's French Canadian. Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, I think that
Sorry, go
he
Just
plays a
conquer
lot of
the
it in
French,
the.
Jesus.
I think he plays out a lot of it in the master, and they didn't get a lot of coverage in that. So some of the editing to me seems a little stilted, and some of the actions seem to take too long. I think you could cut down the movie a little bit, especially the scene where he's walking towards the wooden horse. There's just a lot of time that's spent trying to build extra suspense where I don't think that there is. But presentation wise,
I don't know.
it's beautiful. It's
But-
beautiful.
Yeah, I really I didn't have any issues with the pacing at all. I found it very part of what helped it so much is that it didn't really feel stagnant. Like it was always going from one place to another, and the set design of each location was so dramatically different. And like you said, the color palettes were dramatically different in each location. And so whether or not it's trying to like build suspense in any given scene, I think that it was still very atmospheric. Like there's always something to kind of chew on in the movie in one way or another, and that's part of why I think it's great.
Would you say that there's another movie that does that similar thing where it may not be as logically threaded, but it has a lot of atmosphere to it? Because I would say that Apocalypse Now reminds me of that kind of vibe.
Last Jedi.
Yeah, I think that there's tons of movies.
You sounded like a fucking ghost saying that. The Last Jedi.
Well, ER, you probably have you made a video about Blade Runner.
You
do you
did.
have any-
Yeah, I totally agree with all that's been said, basically, other than disagreeing with Adam that the writing is just kind of fails it in a big way.
Oh,
But-
and sorry, I didn't mean to. This is Glib, by the way. He's someone I've known for a while from the Discord. He's a friend of mine, and I didn't. This is not an ambush. It's literally just I'm terrible with remembering what I feel is wrong with Blade Runner, and I know that he has it on his mind.
Yeah.
So
I just know, like, I liked watching it, but I don't know enough about. I can't remember the first
I
one.
enjoyed it, and I enjoy. I've read the book, and I've obviously seen the original, and I'm a huge. I prefer the original film. I think the original film is has its own flaws in and of itself, but I think that the 49 is so. It's a very enjoyable experience, and that doesn't excuse its flaws. Particularly its logical flaws with the plot, but I do still think it's a good movie, and
And I know that I mentioned this before, but I would just like to reiterate. I still like trains.
you must feel so fucking weird right now.
and I still like turtles.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain because I think there are a lot of people that don't know who I am. Obviously, some people here. My background is that I grew up around the film business and I've worked in it for the last 10 years. And I have a lot of interesting connections through that and insight because of that. So that's why I wanted to seek out people to talk to about it and learn, because I have my own personal interest in trying to be a writer and director. And I don't want to make movies that are going to upset this crowd of people that is gathered here, because it's like this is the fun part, is that we can actually produce better content.
I will tell you this, my friend. If you're adapting anything that already exists, you will always piss somebody off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But this is the question. Like, do you? Well, oh shit, I don't want to do this. I always do this all the time. But there's stuff from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep that I really wish that they could put in, like the mood organ. Do you remember that, Aiden?
Yeah.
Like, so I feel like that the idea of adapting something scares me for that reason. But I think that there's a noble goal if you try to adapt something alongside the vision of the original writer. And if you can get their approval, then I think you're doing some magic.
It can be. Again, I would go back to The Witcher to say that that's not always the case. The Witcher is a really good example of this, actually, because not only did Andrzej Sapkowski kind of rip off the Elric saga, not kind of, he's admitted he ripped it off. So you can't make him happy when CD Projekt Red, did everything that I could imagine in their capacity to try to live up to his expectations and to extend his universe. Still pissed him off. It pissed off some of the fans. It's always going to piss off somebody. That's the problem with adapting.
I would have been grateful
material.
you just sold me a shit ton of books, mate. Thanks.
Well, all I would say is that you are better off going with an original idea. That's now an original idea is harder to sell. It's not going to be as profitable potentially because you don't have something backing it up. But when you're adapting something, it's the whole problem with Star Wars, for example, or anything else. People have read certain things or know certain things or get very, spurgy about stuff with good reason in many cases where this thing wasn't a part of it or that thing wasn't a part of it. And it's really just like it stifles your own vision as a creator, I think, if you have to limit yourself to what someone's already created. That's all I would say.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't I Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner not really all that alike? Because Ridley Scott,
in terms of the original Blade Runner, there's a
it.
bunch of differences between them. Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, he didn't really bother adapting.
I think that it's really hard to adapt Philip K. Dick's work, but the central idea that he's starting with is so enticing that people try and make movies out of it. Has anybody here seen Paycheck with Ben Affleck?
No.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
That was a long time ago.
I think the most successful Philip K. Dick work was Minority Report. It's really difficult.
I remember
because
that.
his writing is a little crazy, just like his train of thought was. So you have to step in there and try and make something that audiences are going to enjoy. And the failure of 2049 successful, like to be successful financially, isn't a surprise because the original one wasn't successful either. I think there's people that just don't vibe with the premise or the setting.
Oh, my beer's cold.
Well, it's a
Also,
bit.
I mean, like Sony, they fucked up the marketing a little. If
I
they
don't think
treated
the
it like
marketing-
one of their other properties, in terms of like how heavily they marketed it, I think that it would have been more successul.
Do you think the marketing of the original or of 2049 was
Of
the
the
problem?
2049.
I think
I don't-
did
I mean,
2049
really,
do poorly?
It didn't
No.
do great compared to its budget. I think it probably made its money back considering all home video and everything, but it wasn't a huge hit for sure. But Sony didn't really treat the film as though they wanted it to be a huge hit. They didn't really put out as many trailers as they should have for that type of property, in my opinion.
Sony has a lot of problems. I think that
Yes.
the movie is too down tempo for them to advertise it in the way that they're accustomed to, because everybody wants to put all of these horns and blaring noises and stuff in their trailers. Like every trailer is the same now, and marketing with that mentality doesn't really make sense. But I just don't think that people are going to connect to that. Like it's not an action movie, and people would want it to be sort of an action movie. It's not really a thriller. It's kind of a slow boil. And I can't think of very many successful mainstream movies or science fiction movies that are like that nowadays. I think that's relegated more to TV.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, there was something I just wanted to mention about the adaptation thing or adaption thing, which is the death of the author being invoked. What would be a good example of that? What's like a movie that veers off that you guys
Taxi
enjoyed
Driver.
that was adapted from a book?
Oh no, I just meant the example of death of the author getting all fucking screwed up because of direct to disagreeing with like a majority of fans' interpretation of the ending. I thought that's what you were going with.
Hmm.
You going
I can
with
see that.
like the book's canonical ending versus an adaptation of the book?
Yeah, because ultimately the reason why I feel like 90% or something of the movies that come out are adaptions is because of the producers that are buying something based on its notoriety or its potential to be notorious. And then there are certain
Oh.
companies that focus on other things like Annapurna and
Hang on, Roadside Picnic.
A23.
Stalker is a
Roadside
good
Picnic is
example
great,
of something where the adapted material really transformed it in a way that was unique and different from what the author originally intended. So I think that as good as Roadside Picnic is, the Stalker games are their own thing. And I would say the same thing for The Witcher to a degree, but like there are instances where someone can take The Shining, is also any Stephen King work, to be honest. Not any Stephen King work, but there's a lot of them where adaptations are better. The Mist film is 100% better than the short story.
I hate that movie. I thought it was shit.
What?
I liked it.
I'll fight you. I will.
I'll fight you. I was
Have you-
recommended it
Hold
over and
up.
over again. I thought it was awful.
What?
Hold up. There's a good chance that you haven't even seen the real version of The Mist.
Oh,
Yeah, because
Frank Darabont originally wanted to
The black
present
and
it
white
in
version.
black and
black
white.
and white.
Yeah.
And it's a very different experience watching the movie in that way. And
It really is.
It's so much more obvious what it's trying to go for. The effects look better. The color, obviously, you don't have to do much with the color when it's in black and white. So everything just looks more even and pleasant.
Its whole atmosphere
it's like a
comes across much more as a campy homage to like 1940s era horror films, which really gets it across. And having read the Stephen King short, I have to say that film is by far and wide a better version of the story.
It's like a Ray Harryhausen kind of callback movie, which you would never understand if you watch it in color, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But black and white, it's just so much more clear what it's going for, and it's a much better movie.
I feel like black and white would bring out The Mist and its quality. Because
good chance it would improve it.
the
I wouldn't deny that.
It doesn't. I mean, like, if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's But I think that it gives you a better idea of what the director was going for in terms of the original cut of the film in the black and white, which does exist. I think if you buy like the Blu-ray version or whatever, it has the
special edition Blu-ray disc too.
I was going to say that The Shining would be another example of a Stephen King story that was made into a movie in a different way, and I think it benefited from that.
Yes, The Shining is also another film, and again, it's a lot of Stephen King, because a lot of Stephen King books are good, but somebody is able to take them and turn them into something that elevates them in a way or transforms them in a way that is interesting and different, but still maintains some of the author's original intent and artistry.
Yeah, isn't that the case with most of his movies? Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, Stephen King is probably the primary example of this. Yeah.
I like chat seems to be split on it. Loads of people saying it's amazing, it's terrible, it's amazing, it's terrible. Maybe it's that kind of movie. I don't know.
I think very much The Mist is a split movie. It has always been that way, as far as I can tell. Like, since it came out, I saw it in theaters and I thought it was really good in theaters, and then I saw the actual cut of it and I thought it was way better. And so I think that it's very much a love it or hate it.
Was I supposed to laugh my ass off at the twist ending?
You mean where everybody kills themselves?
Yeah, like I watched it with a friend. We couldn't stop laughing. We thought it was so funny.
Few films are as ballsy as that.
That's very.
I think it's
very
pretty
ballsy.
fucking ballsy. And that's
Sure.
like you never get that kind of an ending in a horror film. I love that it's like the most depressing ending.
It is because it's 1 second.
Well.
There's campiness to it, but when you watch it again in black and white, the way it was originally supposed to be seen, it even like oh man, it's such a weird feeling. It's like if you've ever seen Brazil, do you know what I mean? The original cut of Brazil was meant to have a happy ending, but if you've seen the actual cut of Brazil, the way it's supposed to end, that's a really ballsy ending to put a film on. And I think that the Mist was a dangerous take for the director to do, and I think it's one of the reasons why the film did so poorly in theaters is because people wanted the happy ending. And if you think it's funny, I can't argue with that. Obviously, that's your take on it, but I think that it was a really interesting film.
Yeah, I mean, like, even in the black and white version, part of why I enjoy it is because of its campiness. But when you watch it in that way, it seems more intentional than unintentional, and it kind of changes the lens at which you view it as. So there's things about them, like when I first watched the movie, the color version, even though I enjoyed parts of it and I enjoyed ideas that it tried to communicate, still I thought it was kind of bad. But watching it in black and white after the fact, it's like, wow, it totally changes your perception of how you view a lot of what's in the film in terms of what the intent is. So when it's trying to mimic like pre-color cheesy horror, it's a lot more enjoyable of an experience when you know that that's kind of what it's going for.
Right. Because and in fact, the director, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but
Frank Darabont.
He worked on Frank Darabont, because he worked on The Walking Dead as well, which is like all the actors that are in The Mist are in The Walking Dead. But the thing is that when you see it through the lens of the film being an intentional cheesy 1940s era horror film, it does change it, because then you don't see it as being so sincere and serious, and it becomes a very silly. Well, maybe not silly, but is the right word. But it's a very different tone that you get from it. And I would recommend everybody watch the director's cut version of it, because it's fantastic, in my opinion. Now, I also think the director's cut of Daredevil is a good film, so don't take my word on everything.
Don't worry, we're allowed controversial takes on here.
Director's cut.
2019 we've gone through seasons of controversial takes, right, Ranks? That's all it's been this year.
I think only those of us who are still in 2019 should be allowed to talk about it. I mean, you guys left. You guys left. You didn't stick around like us OGs did.
Well, I'm just trying to set the table ready for you.
Mueller's is gone. Yeah. Mueller's is gone as
so
the rest.
Trying to get everything ready for you, Rags. Like they dropped me in this place. I don't know. What do you want me to do? Like I'm just trying to get it all ready for you.
To being in 2020.
Sorry, I've not said anything for so long that I
oh shit, Jay's here.
Forget that I was
bloody hell. I thought he was kicked.
Hello, you just listened to a segment of the podcast Every Frame a Pause, or EFAP. Hosted by YouTubers Mauler, Rags, and Fringy, and joined by a cycling variety of guests across the internet, they critically analyze media with exhaustive detail while pausing at every single frame. Subscribe to the EFAP channel and catch new episodes on Saturdays, as well as catch their smaller videos reacting to the latest and not-so-greatest movies and TV shows throughout the week. You can also subscribe here to EFAP Highlights for the latest shorts, clips, and supercuts, also uploaded throughout the week. Links to all the relevant channels can be found in the description section below, as well as links to their communities on Reddit and Discord. Thanks for watching.